Right, hello everybody. Having not read you any Mr. Man or Little Miss Stories for ages, I'm having a little bit of a catch up. So I've just read Mr. Cool. So hopefully you've been able to listen to that and you enjoyed it. I thought that was a cool story. So now I am going to read to you a Little Miss story. And you may have spotted that this story is Little Miss Trouble. So she's a funny old mix of colours, is Little Miss Trouble. She's very round. What colour is she? I'm not sure even how you would describe it. I'll show you the picture in a minute. I don't want to give too much away, but I would say she's a sort of a yellowy, she's possibly the colour we might call olive, like a yellowy, greeny, mustardy colour, probably a mustard colour. She's got a different coloured nose. Anybody know what colour Little Miss Trouble's nose is? I bet it's a nose for trouble. And it is green. And then she has got very distinctive hair that doesn't sort of go with the colour of her rest of her at all. Her hair is a very bright red. And it's in plaits with a bow. Each plait has a bow. Are they plaits or ponytails or bunches? Maybe they're bunches. I'm not very good at hair because my hair, I don't often put into bunches and plaits and things. Anyway, she's got ribbons in them and they are, who knows, they are blue. So that is the little miss of many colours that is Little Miss Trouble. I have a feeling she is going to get into trouble a lot. Shall we see what happens? Here comes trouble, people used to say. And who do you think would come walking along? Well, I think we know, don't we? Because we know who the story's about. That's right. Little Miss Trouble. The trouble she caused. One morning, she went to see Mr. Uppity. And there's Mr. Uppity in his black hat. Do you know what Mr. Small calls you behind your back? She asked him. No, replied Mr. Uppity. What does Mr. Small call me behind my back? And Little Miss Trouble looked at him. Fatty, she said. Well, we don't know if that's true or not, but even if it is true, it's telling tales, isn't it? It's causing trouble. And in fact, Mr. Uppity did not like it, not at all, not one little bit. He went round immediately to see Mr. Small, who you remember is tiny, tiny, tiny small. How dare you call me Fatty, he shouted. But, stammered Mr. Small, who had never called him Fatty. But nothing, shouted Mr. Uppity, and you can see, look, a very cross Mr. Uppity and a very small Mr. Small. Oh no! And he hit poor Mr. Small. Ouch! And it gave him a black eye. Poor Mr. Small, that is awful. So you can see the trouble she causes. And Little Miss Trouble, in fact, was watching all this. Look, she was hiding behind a tree and hugged herself with glee. Oh, I do like making trouble, she giggled. She's not a good girl, is she? I don't know. Next day, Little Miss Trouble went to see Mr. Clever. Do you know what Mr. Small calls you behind your back? She asked him. Why is she picking on poor little Mr. Small who can't defend himself? No, replied Mr. Clever. Tell me, what does Mr. Small call me behind my back? Little Miss Trouble looked at him. Big nose, she said. Do you think Mr. Clever is impressed? Now, Mr. Clever didn't like that very much either. Off he rushed. There he is, look, that looks like a very angry Mr. Clever, doesn't it? and when he found Mr. Small, without waiting for an explanation, he punched him hard. Well, I have to say, there's too much punching in this book, isn't it? This is not good. In the other eye, so poor old Mr. Small has got 2 black eyes now. And he didn't do anything, did he? Oh, look at you, Miss Trouble laughed when she saw him. It's all your fault, Mrs. Small. True, she said, and she walked off with a big fat grin on her face. Do you know, I don't think it's ever a good thing to do, to go hitting people. It never works, does it? It just makes things worse, if anything. If you can't have a conversation about things, if you're upset, first of all, breathe and calm down. Then if you're upset with somebody, you go and talk to them. And then maybe you find out, as in this case, somebody else has been causing trouble. Because sometimes, I don't know why they do it, but sometimes people do it just to cause trouble. Poor Mr. Small, with his poor sad eyes, had to go to the doctor. Good heavens, exclaimed Dr. Makewell when he saw him. Whatever happened to you? And Mr. Small, and you can see there just how small he is next to Dr. Makewell. I think, Dr. Makewell said when he'd heard what Mr. Small had to tell him, that something should be done about that little lady. What she needs is... And then he stopped, and then he chuckled. He thought, that's it, he laughed. What's it? Asked Mr. Small. And Dr. Makewell whispered something to Mr. Small. Would you like to know what he whispered? I'm not telling you. It's a secret. I expect we'll find out. That afternoon, Mr. Small went to see Mr. Tickle. Do you know what Miss Trouble calls you behind your back? He asked. No, said Mr. Tickle. What does Miss Trouble call me behind my back? Mr. Small looked at him. Pudding face, he said. So he's doing what little Miss Trouble does to see if he can get his own back. Do you think that's a good idea? It's a bit like when you play a practical joke on somebody and then they play one back on you and it gets sillier and sillier. Then Mr. Small went to see Mr. Bump. Do you know what Miss Trouble calls you behind your back? He asked. No, said Mr. Bump. What does Miss Trouble call me behind my back? And Mr. Small looked at him. Mr. Nitwit, he said. Mr. Nitwit? Little Miss Trouble was in trouble. How dare you call me Pudding Face? Cried Mr. Tickle, and he tickled her. And how dare you call me Mr. Nitwit? Cried Mr. Bump, and he bumped her. Now, I don't know whether you've ever been tickled and bumped at the same time, but it's not much fun. In fact, it's no fun at all. Tickle bump, tickle bump, tickle bump, tickle bump, tickle, 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 bump, 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 tickle, bump, bump. For 10 minutes, not just 1 minute, not a little tickle, for 10 whole minutes. And 10 minutes of tickle bumping is a very long time. Later that evening, Dr. Makewell strolled round to see Mr. Small. How are the eyes? He asked. Oh, much better now, thank you, replied Mr. Small. And did our little plan work? Asked the doctor. It did indeed, grinned Mr. Small. Well, shake hands, said Dr. Makewell, and they shook hands. Well, not quite hands, as you can see. Mr. Small used his hand, and Dr. Makewell used a whole finger. Dr. Makewell then strolled round to see Miss Trouble. She was feeling very sorry for herself. What's wrong with you? He asked her, and she told him all about it. All about everything. Dr. Makewell looked at her. Cheer up, he said. You know what you've just had, don't you? Little Miss Trouble shook her head. You've had a taste of your own medicine, he chuckled, and he went home for supper. So that's one of those phrases we use sometimes, isn't it? If you've been doing something wrong and somebody does it to you, we sometimes call it a taste of your own medicine. You're giving something to somebody the same as they would have given to you. Do you think it worked? Do you think Little Miss Trouble stopped being Little Miss Trouble? We don't know, do we? I bet she was nowhere near as much trouble in the future, though, as she was, because she knows that sometimes these things come back to tickle and bump you, and we don't want that. I hope that was a good story. I think there are two things I would say about the story, though. I think one is we don't go around hitting people, no matter how much upset we are. That's a disaster. And the other thing I think is that we don't behave like Little Miss Trouble. We certainly don't go saying things about other people that aren't true, are we? I wouldn't, and I don't think anybody in Botley ever would, because that's the kind of people we all are. I hope you enjoyed that. I promise to read you another Mr. Man story very soon. Be happy, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye now.